Alright everybody, so here is the voiceover narrated PowerPoint because I forgot to post this video on my YouTube channel. But on the bright side, the audio will probably be a lot clearer this way. Alright, so here are some stats on fish fauna, North America, the US, quite a few more species than Canada or Mexico. Canada, fewer fishes because glaciers played a pretty big role in limiting fish up north, and fish are still dispersing north. Mexico actually does not have a whole lot of freshwater diversity either, but interestingly enough, it's there's sort of a diversity of habitats, but um, it doesn't have a lot of the northern fishes that the U.S. does have. But anyway, so I have a list of 6 orders and 8 families that I'd like y'all to be familiar with, so we'll go through those now. In order to identify the fish and assign them to the different families, you need to know a little bit of anatomy. So starting with the dorsal fins, the spiny and soft-rayed dorsals, these help us identify fishes to order. The tail, also known as a caudal fin. The anal fin down opposite the dorsal fin. The pectoral fin and the pelvic fin. And in this example, this is actually a largemouth bass, a more evolutionarily modern fish. The pectoral fin is up on the side of the fish. The pelvic fin is directly below it. In more ancient fishes, the pectoral fin is closer to the ventral midline, and that pelvic fin is a little more posterior. The operculum, also known as the gill cover. And then also the lateral line, which is a sensory apparatus. It's a row of of scales with a hole in the middle of them, which are connected directly to the nervous system through cells called mast cells, which are in these sort of jelly-filled canals that conduct vibrations really rapidly. This is an example of a trout, different family, different order, just showing you a little bit of a different arrangement of the fins. There's this adipose fin between the dorsal fin and the caudal fin. And this shows you the example of the body structure where the pelvic fin is more toward the posterior of the fish, and the pectoral fin is down closer to the ventral side, the pelvic fin not being directly below the pectoral fin, like in the earlier picture. All right, so the order Cypriniformes, these dominate freshwaters really around the world, with the exception of Australia and South America, and Africa as well. So there's a lot of diversity here. The minnows are in this order, the suckers as well, and then loaches, which are native to Asia and Africa, and you might have seen them in aquarium, like pet stores, for instance. So a little bit about what makes Cypriniformes cypriniformes. First of all, they don't have any teeth, so they have these protractile mouths without teeth. Um, and the reason they don't have any teeth in their mouth, but they're still able to break down their food, is because they have teeth in their throat. These are called pharyngeal teeth, and there's a couple examples of them to the right. And these can be pretty substantial. So in the image there of the grass carp and black carp pharyngeal teeth, black carp feed on mollusks. They use those teeth to break down the shells. Grass carp, of course, feed on vascular plants, and so they need those teeth to break down the cell walls of those pretty rough plants. And in this order, you see development of breeding tubercles when fish are getting ready to spawn, and so those are like bumps on their head, and in some cases the rest of the body made out of keratin, which is of course the same protein that's in our hair and our fingernails. So with cypriniforms, they have abdominal pelvic fins. So the pelvic fin again is sort of located halfway along the body there. They don't have an adipose fin, but they have a single soft-rayed dorsal fin. So again, looking at the dorsal fin is really the best way to get at order here. So Cypriniformes is a single soft-rayed dorsal fin. Alright, so there's two family within Cypriniformes that we'll be concerned with, really, the minnows and then Catastomata, the suckers. And so just looking at the two, if you were to look at those and say, what are the differences? Some of the things that might jump out at you are some characteristics of the head, the way the lips are put together, and that has to do with how they feed. So minnows, these thin lips, and there's a characteristic pattern of these pharyngeal teeth, which you have to dissect them to see. Suckers, on the other hand, very thick lips. These minnows as well. So basically, almost all the suckers are bottom feeders. Now the minnows, there's some diversity there, but most of them feed on invertebrates during the day, and so they have what we call a terminal mouth, a mouth at the end of the head, whereas these suckers have what we call a subterminal mouth, so they're feeding on things on the bottom of the stream. And it really varies, but for the most part across the family of suckers, they're pretty tolerant. Although the northern hog sucker, which we've seen as an example of an intolerant sucker. Cyprinidae is the largest family of fishes in the world, so extremely successful. And 40% of the minnows that we see in North America are what are known as shiners. So you might remember like the whitetail shiner, war paint shiner, these kinds of things. Very silvery, strong swimming, sort of mid-water column type of fishes. So a couple pictures of some minnows that we were likely to see or have seen already. The central stone roller, again, it has that cartilaginous lower lip for feeding on algae on rocks. Kind of looks to me as if it's sort of missing scales. It has sort of a coppery color to its body. Both the river chub and the creek chub are sometimes confused. The creek chub is a very tolerant species. We see a lot of these guys in Glens Creek, Reed Creek, and they have a black spot there at the base of the dorsal, as you can see on the right. River chub have a little different looking head. To me, the creek chub has a very oval shaped head. The river chub has more of a triangular head. And the diamond shaped pattern of the scales on the river chub jump out at me, as does the fact that they have red to orange on their tail and the ventral fins very often. Here's a picture of a river chub. When river chubs are young, especially, they can have a stripe going all along the side. But in this picture, you can really see those diamond-shaped scales sticking out, and then the red, orangish color on the fins. There's a fish called the whitetail shiner. It has, similar to the river chub, a diamond-shaped scale pattern, but very silvery. Whereas with the river chub, there's more of a dark pattern to it. Whitetail shiners, very silvery, as are all the shiners. And what distinguishes it are those two pale splotches at the base of the caudal fin. You can see the tubercles on the head of the fish on the top there. War paint shiner, probably one of the easiest minnows to identify when they're in their breeding coloration, so that real bright orange stripe on the gill cover there, and then also in the dorsal fin, and that silvery body color again, and mouth at the tip of the head that characterizes the shiners. Saffron shiner, this is a male, and the breeding colors, these are generally more of a darker colored fish, and when they're not in their breeding colors, they have red right around the mouth. But yeah, when they're breeding, just beautiful bright red fish. So the dace, black nose and long nose dace. We saw a long nose dace in Beachy Creek. Black nose dace, I believe we saw in Sweeten Creek. So both of these very, very tiny scales. You can hardly see the scales there at all. The long nose dace, Very streamlined fish. You look at the head there, very pointy snout, and very thick muscled body just in front of the tail. So this is a fish that hangs out in really high flow velocity habitats. The black-nosed dace down below it, this is another common fish in sort of degraded sites like our Campus Creek here. It has this dark stripe that goes from the base of the tail all the way along the body onto the snout. And again, what makes a dace are these tiny scales. It almost looks like they don't have scales unless you look really close. And they kind of both have sort of this mottled coloration to them. Another picture of the long-nosed dace. These are just cool-looking fish. Cool-looking fish, very powerful swimmers. And again, a streamlined snout. You can see sort of a subterminal mouth, so they're going to be picking invertebrates off the bottom in riffles and high-flow velocity habitats. Well, the term minnow is often used just to refer to small fish in general, but in fact, minnow, again, as we mentioned, is actually the technical name for a family of fishes. And some minnows aren't so small. This is a fish called the Colorado pike minnow, which is a serious predator on even juvenile salmon and trout out west. So the Colorado pike minnow is quite a predator, and it's a native minnow species. Oops, I spelled suckers wrong. But anyway, here are some suckers that we're likely to see. Northern hogsucker, pretty cool looking fish. Again, very distinctive. The sucker mouth on the bottom of the head. They're made for a life of living on the bottom. They have a very camouflaged saddleback pattern as seen from the top. And if you look at them kind of head on, the skull is concave between the eyes. You can kind of see it in the picture of the one that's being held up there. This is one that's caught out of Bent Creek right there. So northern hogsucker, it's going to be feeding on invertebrates off the bottom of the stream. Yeah, so just to show you some of the habitats that these suckers can live in. So this is a research project we did out in some urban streams. And so this was West Asheville. This is Patton Avenue, not too far from where New Leicester Highway comes in down there by the Ingalls there as we head towards West Asheville. And so kind of the concrete jungle here. You walk past the tire dealership and the tattoo parlor to get to the creek. And once you get to the creek, it doesn't look too good. You can see an awful lot of sediment in this creek, which means there's a lot of erosion going on. We see evidence of just a real high sediment load. You know, you see some mud and some sand, some silt along the banks there. Tells you this is an urban stream that deals with really high flow fairly frequently and some pretty high erosion events. Full of all kinds of stuff. Man, there's wood in there, there's trash, all kinds of stuff, kind of sad. But there were some fish that were doing okay in here. There's a fish called the white sucker, Catostomus conversonii. There were tons of these in there. So they were living just fine, and they were feeding on organic matter, whatever they could get on the bottom of that stream. Alright, so order Siluriformes. These are the catfishes. They have barbels, depending on the species. The number of them can vary, but small eyes. So these are mostly taste and smell scent feeders, although the channel catfish is an exception. The body is either scaleless or covered in bony plates, like the Plecostomus catfishes have. The lower Cariidae catfishes have bony plates that they're covered in. And they have stout spines in their fins, both on the dorsal and pectoral side, that the spines actually lock into the catfish's skeleton. So once a catfish locks its spines out, it's a very effective defense, and you don't want to try to grab them when those spines are out, unless you grab around the spines, they'll get you. So the only family of catfishes in North America are the Ictaluridae, and about 45 species of them. And what defines these catfishes is these are scaleless. They don't have any bony plates at all. This is a channel catfish on the right. and they're identified by their 8 pairs of barbels. And you can see an adipose fin here as well in these catfishes. But again, the lack of scales in those 8 barbels are really what tell you that a catfish is a catfish. A couple species that are around. This is a species called a flat bullhead. So the bullhead catfishes are a little smaller genus of catfishes, smaller than some of the other ones. Order Salmoniformes. So these are the trouts and the smelts, which the salmon are included in the trouts. These are mostly cold water fishes, and they're able to move between fresh and salt water. So in places where rivers and streams flow into the ocean, trout will migrate back and forth, and they'll go out into the ocean actually to feed on fishes, so they can grow faster and then come back into the streams to spawn. So a couple species to identify for you. The Salmonidae, first of all, Salmonidae in general, really the adipose fin is the main thing to jump out at you. They have an adipose fin, but they don't have any barbels. And so if it has an adipose fin and no barbels, it's a trout or salmon in North America. There's one family of fishes, the characins, which are native to South America, which have an adipose fin, but they don't come up much into North America. Alright, so a couple of species for you. This has an overall kind of orangish cast to it, very dark brown spots, very orangish fins. This is a brown trout. You can't really see it in this picture, but they also have square tails, not much of a fork to the tail at all. This here, it has kind of these like worm-like markings above the lateral line and a few red spots and a little bit of a fork to the tail there. This is a brook trout. Oh yeah, also the white margin on the fin. So if you look at the anal fin there and the pelvic fin, a strong white marking on the outside margins. Should mention the brook trout is the only trout native to the U.S. west or east of the Rockies. Now this trout is now found reproducing naturally all over streams where we are, but it's not native here. It was stocked. It has this kind of pinkish coloration along the lateral line, a real rounded head, and sort of these dark spots. And that's the rainbow trout. And so it kind of has this sort of pink here. It's very, very, very silvery, but kind of a rounded head, these dark spots, and then that pink band on the lateral line. So the rainbow trout. And so this trout was native originally just to the Rockies and west, but has been stocked all through eastern North America as well now. Okay, Asaciformes. These are the pikes. The fish on the upper right there is a muskellunge, the muskie. That's fish taken from the French Broad River. It's the furthest south that muskies occur in the French Broad River. There's about 10 species of these, not very speciose. So they've got this characteristic slender body shape, kind of like a barracuda for those of y'all that know marine fishes, and a whole bunch of cone-shaped teeth. And they're what we call lion weight predators. So they're not out chasing prey; they're sitting. Either they're hanging under a log or some other kind of cover. And then they'll come out and strike whatever swims by. Fish on the bottom is a chain pickerel. It's one that we collected from Bent Creek. Was hanging out under a log there near the mouth. So these are generally cold water species. As I mentioned, they are the French Broad is the furthest south that the muskies get, but a fish like the northern pike on the upper right are going to be found colder areas. Pickerels like the chain pickerel shown there, they can hang out a little bit warmer temp. So if you want a little more of an identifying characteristic, the distinctive dorsal fin all the way back toward the tail, it's kind of paired with the anal fin there. Kind of looks like an alligator, and again this fish called a chain pickerel that we got from Bent Creek near the confluence back in spring 2010. And actually collected, may have been the same fish, I don't know, again, 2 years later when we were there. Okay, so Perciformes. This is the largest order of vertebrates. So very successful. Again, we look at the dorsal fin to tell us order. So these two dorsal fins, one with hard spines and the other one not spiny. The pelvic fins are near the thoracic or jugular, close to the head or absent. And the pectoral fins, again, are up high on the side of the body. So over 9,000 species of these. These include lots of marine species, things like striped bass and all kinds of bluefish, all kinds of things. So very, very successful. So there's two families that we're going to concern ourselves with here. The first is Percidae. These are the perches. Over 200 species around the globe, but over 90% of those are found east of the Rockies. And these actually migrated from Europe, as we'll talk about in a second, but they've diversified so that now they're most diverse as darters east of the Rockies. So again, they have the spinous and the soft ray dorsal fins, because of course they're in perciforms. But what sets the Percidae apart from the Centrarchidae, which we'll look at in a second, is that they have long, slender body shape with very small mouths. And again, there are two evolutionary lineages of these. One are the darters, these colorful small fishes which live in riffles primarily in the eastern United States. The other is that of this large-bodied group, the walleye or the sander. Again, this is the species of fish that we have up on the wall in 132. Incredibly colorful diversity in the darters. You know, people that say that temperate fish aren't pretty, the tropical ones are the prettiest fish. They just have not seen the kinds of darters that we have around. And we've gotten at least 3 of these species around here. So it's really, really pretty. And of course, these live in clear waters, clear, clean waters, because those sorts of colors would only be advantageous if water was clear enough to allow the other individuals to see the fish with their colors. There's a couple of darter species that we're likely to see, or may have seen. Redline darter, we unfortunately actually didn't see, I don't think. But they're kind of pretty common in the Swannanoa, but again, I don't think we've seen it. Gilt darter, it's got this pretty kind of gold, almost like a bunting kind of pattern along the side there. Some red and some green as well. This is a younger gilt darter. That's what this looks like. I think we did see a fantail darter at Beetree Creek. I can't see it really well here, but it's got this convex tail with these bars going down the side. It's a little better picture of it to show that characteristic tail, and this is actually an egg mimic species. So the males get these growths on their short dorsal fin, spiny dorsal fin, that look like eggs, and they use it to attract the females. This is the kind of habitat where you'd find a lot of darters, real clear stream with a lot of rocky substrate. This is Mills River. Alright, so the other family of fishes within Perciformes is Centrarchidae. So these are sunfishes. They're native only to North America, although they have been stocked all around the world by now. So you can see the spiny and soft dorsal fin, which characterizes all of the perciforms. But what looks different from Percidae are the deep bodies, sort of laterally compressed deep bodies, and the forked tails as well. So the tail is a little bit characteristic compared to the darters, but really the main thing is the deep body shape. It's the fins are similar to the darters, but very different body shape. some fish that I believe we saw at Sweeten Creek, red breast sunfish with that real orangish red on the ventral surface there, kind of down below the gill cover, the operculum. The green sunfish, a darker shade to this sunfish, a very large mouth. These are piscivorous. It's got those blue-green sort of marks radiating onto the operculum. Although you may have noticed the red breast sunfish had a little bit of that. But then it has these red margins, red to white margins on the edges of its dorsal, caudal, and anal fin as well. That makes this a green sunfish. Bluegill, perhaps the most common sunfish. It's not really easy to see in this picture, but it has a dark splotch on the posterior end of its soft dorsal fin. Sorry, I meant to say it has a splotch at the posterior part of its soft dorsal fin. This is the kind of stream where you'd find a lot of sunfishes. This is Newfound Creek near Leicester. A lot of fine sediment. I should have mentioned these sunfishes are nest builders. And so to build a nest to spawn in, you have to have some fine substrate to do that. And, so that's where you'll find these. All right, Scorpioniformes. This is an order which is primarily marine, but we do have a few freshwater Scorpioniformes, and they're sculpins, so they're within the family Codidae. So they hang out in cold water streams. So it's a cold water species and a real distinctive body shape. I know we saw some of these at Beechtree Creek, but they have sort of a dorsoventrally flattened head, eyes on the top of their head, which tell you that they sit on the bottom. They're looking up. They have very large pectoral fins. The reason they have that is that they can use it to kind of wedge themselves in between rocks in high flow riffles, which is where the invertebrates that they feed on are going to live. So it's a good place for them, a good way for them to hang out in high flow velocity, nice habitats for their food. All right, so if we were to go ahead and summarize then the 6 orders and the 8 families that I'd like you to learn, this is a list right here. So I went through that pretty quick, definitely quicker than I did in class, but on the bright side, you can go back and look over whatever you need to go back to. So happy studying, and I'll look forward to seeing you on Thursday.